Before there were Chicago Bears, before there was an NFL, and before anybody thought to preserve a proper box score, George House's football team welcomed Jim Thorpe's football team to Chicago. Except Jim Thorpe never entered the game. This is chapter 124, and we're going all the way back to November 20th, 1921. The Chicago Staleys are hosting the Cleveland Indians at Cubs Park, the ballpark that won't be renamed Wrigley Field till 1927. The league isn't even called the National Football League yet. This is the second season of the American Professional Football Association, or APFA. Calling it a league is being generous. There's no fixed schedule, there's no divisions or playoffs. Teams arrange games as they go, sometimes against league opponents, and sometimes against whatever local club may attract a paying crowd. The APFA has started publishing standings, but individual standings won't become an official league project until 1932. That's still 11 years away. The association follows college football's rules. The forward pass is legal, but the passer has to release the ball at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Most players remain on the field for offense and defense. Punting, it's not an admission of defeat. It's a normal way to exchange possession while improving field position. So this isn't a primitive version of modern football. It's a completely different game that eventually morphs into modern football. And Chicago enters undefeated. The Staleys are 6-0 overall and 5-0 against APFA competition. A week earlier, they beat Rock Island 3-0 on a Dutch tournament field goal. That's it. One kick. Everybody goes home. Cleveland's 2-3, but the Indians have been more dangerous than that record suggests. They opened the season by beating Columbus 35-9 and Cincinnati 28-0. Their three losses have come 3-2 against Dayton, 10-6 against Buffalo, and 7-0 against Canton. They've lost 3 straight games by a combined 12 points. Before we go any further, we should probably identify the teams, but that's not as easy as it sounds. Chicago began as the Decatur Staleys, a company team sponsored by the A.E. Staley starch business. During the 1921 season, A.E. Staley turned the operation over to George Halas and gave him $5,000 to move it to Chicago. There was one condition. Halas had to retain the Staley's name through the end of the year. So they changed cities, but they haven't yet changed names. Some contemporary accounts still call them Decatur. Others call them Chicago. Modern databases somehow managed to do both. Cleveland's even messier. This franchise played as the Tigers in 1920. In 1921, Indians became another commonly used name, partly because Cleveland signed 3 prominent native players, Jim Thorpe, Joe Guyon, and Pete Kalak. Newspapers still used Tigers whenever they felt like it, and this isn't the Cleveland Browns. It's not even connected to the later Cleveland Bulldogs either. This particular Cleveland franchise disappears after this season. In the meantime, Chicago is about to become one of the most permanent institutions in American sports. George Halas is only 26 years old. He's already the owner, coach, promoter, and starting right end. He handles contracts, organizes practices, and then puts on a uniform and plays offense and defense. Dutch Sterneman is his primary business partner, halfback, kicker. Guy Chamberlain plays the other end. George Trafton starts at center. Halas, Chamberlain, and Trafton all reach the Pro Football Hall of Fame. This sounds like it should become a duel between Halas and Thorpe, 2 men who helped construct professional football while they were still playing it. And it is, in a way. It just isn't the duel anybody at Cubs Park expected to see. Jim Thorpe is 34. He's already won the Olympic decathlon and pentathlon. He's played Major League Baseball and turned the Canton Bulldogs into professional football's greatest attraction. In 1920, the APFA made him its first president, partly because his name gave the new organization instant credibility. Thorpe could run, pass, and tackle. He punted and kicked field goals. He was famous enough that people would buy a ticket just to watch him warm up. But Thorpe injured his ribs during Cleveland's October victory over Cincinnati. He's played sparingly since, and against Chicago, he never leaves the sideline. Cleveland has Joe Guyon, a future Hall of Famer from the White Earth Reservation, Minnesota. Guyon played with Thorpe at Carlisle before helping Georgia Tech win the national championship in 1917. Pete Kalak, another former Carlisle player, is the fullback. 6 Cleveland players had been members of the Canton Bulldogs 1 year before. This isn't some collection of anonymous factory workers. It's a talented club built around famous players whose best attraction happened to be injured. The man who takes over the game is Gaylord Pete Stinchcomb. Stinchcomb is listed at about 5'8", 160 pounds. He played quarterback and halfback at Ohio State, spent part of World War I in the Navy, and helped lead the Buckeyes to their first undefeated season. He was a consensus All-American 1920 and played in Ohio State's first Rose Bowl. He also won the 1921 Intercollegiate Championship in the long jump, and that last detail becomes important once Stinchcomb finds the open field. Now, usually a box score tells us what happened, but this box score starts an argument. Some records estimate the crowd at 8,500. Contemporary accounts place it closer to 10,000, but how would we ever tell? Stinchcomb's first touchdown is reported at 80 yards in one source and 85 in another. His second is listed as 11 or 30 yards. Dutch tournament field goal is listed at 23 yards and also listed as a 35-yarder. The sources don't completely agree on which quarter produced which score. They can't even agree whether Chicago is Chicago or Decatur, or Cleveland is the Indians or the Tigers. But that's not a reason to manufacture details. It's part of the history. We know the structure of the game. We know who scored. We know Chicago won 22-7. Everything finer than that has spent more than a century being smudged around the edges. After a scoreless opening stretch, Stinchcomb breaks the game open. He gets through the initial traffic, and Cleveland can't catch him. The contemporary Decatur account calls it an 80-yard touchdown run. Another reconstruction gives him 85. Pick whichever number you want. It's still a tiny man running almost the entire length of Cubs Park. Chicago misses the extra point, leaving the score at 6-0. The Staley's second touchdown is stranger. A fumble ends up in the Cleveland end zone, and quarterback Pard Pierce receives credit for recovering it. Sterneman converts the extra point, making it 13-0. Stinchcomb scores again on another run, and depending on which reconstruction you trust, he's either cutting through Cleveland from 11 yards away or breaking loose from the 30. The conversion fails. Sterneman adds a field goal. Contemporary accounts generally place it at 35 yards, while the modern Pro Football Reference summary says 23. Either way, Chicago reaches 22. Cleveland finally answers with Pete Kalak pounding across from 3 yards out. Guyon kicks the extra point. There's no surviving passing statistics. No verified completion appears in the reconstructed record. Every known point comes through running, kicking, or recovering the loose football in the end zone. Chicago wins 22-7. The following morning, newspapers described Cleveland as beaten decisively. Stinchcomb received most of the attention after scoring twice and contributing to a third touchdown. The Cleveland coverage makes Thorpe's absence part of the headline. There's no post-game press conference to recover. No television interview exists. What survives is a final score, several newspaper stories, and a collection of details that refuse to line up perfectly. 4 days later, Chicago plays the Buffalo All-Americans on Thanksgiving. Buffalo wins 7-6, handing the Staleys their only loss. 3 days after that, Chicago beats Green Bay 20-0 in the first meeting between the organizations that later became the Bears and the Packers. Then, Halas scheduled Buffalo again. And Buffalo believes the December 4th game is a postseason exhibition. Chicago considers it another league game. The Staleys win 10-7, then defeat Canton and the Chicago Cardinals. Chicago finishes 9-1-1 in APFA games. Buffalo finishes 9-1-2. The association recognizes the Staleys as champions, reasoning that Chicago won the second meeting between the clubs. Buffalo never really accepts that explanation. It becomes known as the Staley Swindle, one of the first championship controversies in NFL history. Do you give Chicago the title, or does Buffalo have a legitimate complaint after winning the original scheduled game? In 1922, the APFA changes its name to the National Football League. The Chicago Staleys become the Chicago Bears. Cleveland has a much shorter future. Thorpe returns in December and helps Cleveland beat Wrigley's New York Giants 17-0 at the Polo Grounds. The Indians later lose to Washington and finish 3-5 in league competition. Owner Jimmy O'Donnell receives permission to suspend operations, but he can't post the league's required $1,000 guarantee. The franchise gets canceled. Thorpe, Guyon, and Kalak move to the newly created Oorang Indians in 1922. Stinchcomb remains with Chicago for another year. He earns first-team All-Pro recognition in both 1921 and 1922, then moves around the Young League before leaving football. He'll eventually enter the College Football Hall of Fame. And that leaves us with one surviving meeting between two founding APFA franchises. One of them changes its name and lasts forever. The other changes its name and disappears. Chapter 124 isn't preserved on film. It doesn't have a clean statistical record. We can't watch Stinchcomb break into the open or see Thorpe standing injured along Cleveland's sideline. But the central fact survived. November 20th, 1921, Cubs Park. Pete Stinchcomb runs away from Cleveland. The Staleys remain undefeated, and Chicago wins 22-7. The National Football League doesn't exist yet, except, of course, it does. It just hasn't figured out its name.